Welcome to the Book Flood Podcast. I am your host, Tom Nixon. My guest this week is Texas High School librarian Lucy Ibarra Podmore. She is the former chair of the Texas Association of School Librarians and a 2024 Library Journal Mover and Shaker. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
I am as well. Why don't we start with your career trajectory? How did you get to here?
So 30 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long, I started out as a second grade teacher and lasted there 1 year. That is an incredible job that was not cut out for me. And I moved to middle school, which I loved. My middle school students moved from Houston to San Antonio and it stayed in a middle school setting until I was ready to have my first child. And I was able to stay home with my two daughters for 7 years when I went back
Nice.
to school to get my master's degree in library sciences. And so once the girls were in school, then I went back in as a librarian and again started in middle school, stayed there for about 8 years or 9 years, and then moved into high school where I am right now.
Oh, nice. What is the most challenging part of being a librarian in 2026?
Well, first of all, when I first became a librarian, the mentor that I had, she said, "Welcome to the best job in the school." And that hasn't changed. It absolutely is. I get to interact with so many teachers, with all of the teachers on campus, with all of the students in various capabilities. There's no stress tied to the library in terms of students being in there, for grades or things like that.
Mhm.
So we just get a chance to talk about them, their interests, their reading habits, what they're working on for class. So it is a really fantastic job. The challenge right now is there are so many other things, important things that are happening that are taking time and attention away from needs of the library. And I feel like sometimes the library, when you discuss challenges that are happening in the library community, people are like, well, yes, but there's all of these other things that are happening. And so I think it's just emphasizing the importance, the library in all aspects, in the public library, in the school library, in an academic library, a lot of times they are the backstop to problems that go unsolved unless the library is there. And so I think it's important for us to continue to talk about services that we provide other than the traditional services that everybody knows us for, which is finding great books or helping research. But there are lots of other things that librarians do when funding is cut for schools. A lot of times libraries and librarian positions are some of the first ones to
Right.
go because people don't see them as essential. And I think that's such a very short-sighted view when I hear some of my colleagues talk about their districts removing entire library staff. So they basically have a room full of books that is
Mm.
manned by a volunteer who do great things, but certainly a trained certified librarian is the one who is making those connections for the students and for the teachers and finding resources to help that. And so I think again, it's vying for the attention and making sure that people recognize the importance of a library and a librarian. And when those positions are eliminated or when those programs are eliminated, those have long lasting impacts. It's not just for the year. It's not just for, until we get our footing back. It's a long lasting issue, I think, when these programs are cut. And so I think that's one of the big challenges that we're working with right now. I had a long-term friend who was an administrator who told me years ago, he said, "Lucy, I'm going to be very honest with you when I tell you this, that a lot of people, a lot of administrators will not be concerned with the library unless the library is on fire." And I told my current administrator that a couple of years ago. I said, "I'm just letting you know the library is on fire. So we need to really work together." And that was a great conversation that I had with my administrator. And he has been solidly by my side since that conversation happened. And so I think it's maybe raising the urgency that the cuts to libraries or librarians is something that we really, really need to be paying attention to, in addition to all of the other pieces, the book banning and all of those pieces. And
Right.
right now, book banning is causing the fire, I think, in a lot of people's minds, but we know it goes much deeper than that. And so it's, again, stressing the urgency that everybody needs to get together and come together for support of the library and the people that we support, the students and the teachers and the community that we support.
In 2024, you were named a Library Journal Mover and Shaker. How has that worked out for you?
That's been great. I was so thankful for my colleague who nominated me for that position or that recognition. And it's really just provided a platform for me to discuss things that are happening in the broader library world, but also some of the programs that we have started on my campus. And so it's been nice to share that information. What's been really great is to see how people that I haven't met before, but people who have read an article or something that they've tried some of these programs in their own school. And it makes me very, very happy to know that this is just spread a little bit like a wildflower.
Well, as a librarian and a former administrator, I can tell you that I loved when anybody got an award because that's a way to do solid press for the library.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great way to, again, highlight some of the things that we do maybe beyond the traditional, what everybody knows, collecting books, promoting reading, that sort of thing. But it's nice to know that it's nice to have that platform to share some really great things that are happening in not just our library, but in libraries across, I'm in Texas, so I'll say the state of Texas, but also
Mm.
across the country.
Tell us about your freedom walks.
Yeah, so our Freedom Walk was something this kind of came about after I was very involved in our Texas legislature session that happened in 2023. And I was meeting with a lot of staffers, I was meeting with a lot of elected officials who really didn't have a very clear understanding of the way libraries worked. They had a very public facing view, right? Librarians ordered books and they put books in the hands for children, right? And so that's kind of all the public, the general public sees, right? And so through the discussions that we had, I recognized that there was a huge need to educate our community on how those books make it to the shelves, right? They don't just
Mm.
magically appear. There's, a whole process that we take into account. We look at reviews, we look at our district guidelines for, what books are allowed in what levels and that sort of thing. And so there was just a lot of misinformation out there about how librarians did their jobs. And so I thought I had heard on this was like an online PD that was not really geared towards school librarians, but it was all different librarians. And so I ended up in an academic librarian, and she was just talking about marketing her library and on the college campus. And she was talking that she set up tables outside, kind of like you see at any college campus,
Mhm.
and they just had information about their library. And I thought, well, that's a great way to get its movement, it's outside, and to get my library outside of the traditional walls, right? And so the Freedom Walk came about because there was this need to educate my community. Our traditional banned books week was coming up, and I wanted to flip that. And I wanted to not focus on the banned books, but I really wanted to focus on our freedoms as readers, our freedom to read and access information. And so the Freedom Walk then became 5 tables where we had volunteers, and I was working the first table that I was working at was really just talking about the laws that guarantee our freedom. So First Amendment rights that we have, the court cases that reaffirmed those rights for readers. And so we had a lot of really great discussion with the students, and they had some really wonderful questions about at that stage, this at that table. The second table was really talking about the different terms that get thrown around in banned book discussion. What does a banned book mean? What does a challenge mean? What is a reconsideration? Those sort of things. And so I just want our community and our students to be informed when they hear these kinds of discussions happening and things going on, that they have a good solid background of information so that they can make better decisions, or they could, express their opinions more clearly. One of the other tables is a display of the books that have been removed from different districts outside of our own. So districts in Texas and districts in the rest of the country. And this year we kind of added a different thing. We had one of those giant dice that we purchased from the store. And instead of the dots on the dice, we had covers of books. And with the kids rolled the dice, and I said, okay, has this been banned, challenged, or removed from the shelf? Or has it been saved, banned, challenged, or saved?
Hmm.
From the in the library. And the discussions when favorite books popped up, the students were like, why is this happening? Why is Pinkalicious on this list? What is going on with that? And so we had some really great discussion again about, what does that reconsideration policy look like in our district? That was the next table. So how does a book make it to our shelves? The premise for that table was collection development policy. And I was thinking in my head, like, nobody cares about that. It's the most boring
Right.
topic, especially to these 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds who are, wandering through our table. But I turned it into a little shoots and ladders game. And so again, how does a book make it to our shelves? And so we talked about the definition. So where is it, the challenge is coming up? So there's a reconsideration policy that goes into effect when this happens. How does the committee work? Who serves on the committee? What is the committee charged with? And then once the committee makes the decision, what happens after that? Is that the final decision? And so the Freedom Walk then just kind of, it's those tables. There was one last table, which is basically how do I make my voice heard on any issue? And it was a voter registration table. And so we had some really great, again, conversations. The first year that I tried it, I was nervous about people saying, well, why are you getting political with this? But I kept saying this in my head, repeating to myself that I am providing information for my students, right? And that's, a line that we have to make sure that we don't cross, right? I am providing information about things that you're seeing and you're hearing that directly impact you and the resources that you have access to on our campus. And we had fantastic positive results and comments from our students, from our parents who helped at some of the tables. They were volunteering at the tables. We had a great conversation with some teachers, some of our APUSH teachers, our advanced placement US history students. They
Right.
received extra credit for coming to the tables, and they had a little bookmark that had all of the stations that they were to go to. And I just told them, I said, just write information that you learned, and their entire bookmark was covered. And this is extra credit, and so normally it's just a line or two that the kids might write, but they were very, very interested in it. And so I'm so glad that helped raise awareness of what was happening, but also engage them enough that they continued that conversation.
So San Antonio has a great event every year called Library Palooza. What's your role in that?
So Library Palooza started 17 years ago. We started planning this 17 years ago, and was on the initial planning committee. So I think I'm one of the last two. One of my colleagues, it was her brainchild, and we helped work this out and get the funding and organize the first ones. But Library Palooza is a teen author event. And so in San Antonio, we recognized that book tours that happened, author tours that happened for young adults, they hit Houston, they hit Austin, and they hit Dallas. And San Antonio is always bypassed. And so we really wanted to have an opportunity to bring those authors to our students. And these, our focus was to find the authors that maybe schools couldn't afford, right? So they had a large speaking fee or something, or they were out of the state of Texas. So it was financially difficult for a lot of schools to pay for airfare or pay for hotel, pay for an honorarium, that sort of thing. So we fundraised for the first, we won a grant. My colleague wrote a grant. She won a fantastic grant that kicked us off. And next year, we're celebrating our 15th year bringing this festival. And I think that's the longevity of that festival. I don't know how long specific festivals for teen readers have been around, but I'm so proud that this has been happening for 15 years. We have students, well, former students who have come back as adults. Just cemented my love for reading. It's a really great place. We get this comment every year that the readers are so happy to be surrounded by other readers, right? So this is like their rock star moment or their, NBA finals moment kind of thing, right? Where all of the fans of one event come together. And this is what we have. We have 7 authors each year that come out. And at the beginning of the year, we announce those 7 authors, and our students are and librarians are promoting these books. We're encouraging the students to read them. So when the authors do arrive in San Antonio, it's in February is the festival. So they've had about 6 or 7 months where we're just constantly talking about these 6 or 7 authors. And so the authors have commented that this festival, the kids come very prepared to because they're vested in the books that
Mm.
they have been reading with these authors. And so it's a really fantastic day for readers. And we're so happy that it's just continued on. Community support has still been strong.
Who were some of the authors that you had this year?
Yeah, so this year we had Huda Fahmy, who is a National Book Award winner or finalist. Sorry, Huda, I can't remember, but she was there with us. We had E. Lockhart with us this year. We had Chloe Gong with us this year. We also had Scott Rankin. We had Amber McBride scheduled, and she unfortunately became ill the week that she was
Oh, no.
supposed to arrive. So we had 3 National Book finalists, winners with us this year, but she couldn't make it. We'll have her back with us at some point. But we had a really great day with our readers. We also had um, oh, I'm drawing a blank. This is not good. I'm drawing a blank on our last author that we had with us, but Sam Van Leer. She was with us for our lunchtime author, Samantha Van Leer, who wrote Extraterrestrial Zoo. It's such a great middle grade book. So this is a festival too that's for middle and high school students. Previously, we have had Neil Schusterman, we've had
Right.
Tiffany Jackson, we've had so many really wonderful Jenny Han and Marie Lu. We've had some really outstanding authors. And for our 15th, we're planning some really great celebrations for that one.
How have you continued to be able to fund this?
Yeah, well, we have a great community partner in Texas. Everybody, if you come to Texas and you talk to anybody who lives in San Antonio specifically, but Houston, Corpus, we have this really strange love for our beloved HEB, which is our grocery store here in
Mm.
the town. And they are such an amazing community partner for so many things. But education is one of their big um, pieces. Last year, they partnered with the Texas Library Association to do donation, I guess, slips at the checkout. And the Texas Library Association was able to raise thousands and thousands of dollars for summer reading programs for that. So they have been a sponsor every year for our festival, and so we are so grateful for them because without them, it would have been our journey to 15 years would have been a lot more difficult.
Thank you, HEB.
Yes, yes, HEB is the best.
You received the Sarah Jafarian Award.
Yeah.
Who is Sarah Jafarian, and why did you get this award?
So the Sarah Jafarian Award is from the ALA, the American Library Association Public Education Public Programs Office, and it recognizes excellence in humanities program. And the year that I won it was the first year that it had opened up beyond middle schools. Previously, it was a K through 8 program, so any librarians in a K through 8 setting could apply for this. And the year that our program was awarded, that was the first year that it had opened up for high schools. And because I was selected as the winner, and the winning program was the Freedom Walk that we had just discussed.
Mm.
And after that, I was asked to be on the committee that selected the next year's winner. And I love every second of that committee because I was able to see so many great programs just being, again, created across this country for our students, our public school students. It was not just public schools, it's private schools as well. But our school librarians are so creative in the way they educate our students. And so, very, very honored to be included in that group. Unfortunately, with some funding restructuring, they've put a pause on the award, but we're hoping that will come back very, very soon because, again, it's just wonderful to see. Again, kind of going back to the very first comment or discussion question that we answered, this award really helps people recognize that the libraries are so much more than books alone, right?
Mm.
It's books plus all of the connections that these books can make for us and for our communities. And so hopefully hoping to see that award return very soon.
Recently, you were in Washington, D.C. advocating for Texas libraries. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was advocating for libraries nationwide.
Mm.
We were focusing on our Texas elected officials, though, and this one was the Library Legislative Day. So, in the Texas Library Association, I'm the chair of our legislative and advocacy committee. And so we were there really talking about funding for E-rate and funding for technology purchases for public libraries, for all libraries, for public, for school libraries, and for academic libraries. And so it was really great to walk into our representatives' offices and just share with them some of the things that have been going on. And again, when we're talking about so many things vying for the attention of our elected officials, of our constituents, of our communities, it was a great opportunity to really highlight how the libraries really help so many of these different programs that they might see in a silo. For example, one of them is like a career college readiness, a career college military readiness, and there are a lot of programs in the library that support things like that. And so
Mm.
having an opportunity to really talk about how, the programs that our libraries are creating to help new parents talk about literacy. How can they improve literacy at home? And what does a story time look like at home versus what does a story time lesson look like in the library? And how can we help our young parents or our new parents, make those connections for their young people? All of these are just building blocks, right, to a stronger, more educated community. And it starts there with our libraries. So, our libraries are a key player in that.
What's the response been from the Texas legislators?
Well, our members who were serving in DC, they were really great. Their staffs, we met with their staffers, and they were all very supportive of libraries, and so that's a good first step. And so, to say yes, we love libraries. Everybody does love libraries. The next step is moving them to funding to funding the libraries. So yes, we
Right.
know we are beloved, and that's a very true. When you ask people about their library experiences, so many people have these wonderful, very heartfelt and compelling stories about how libraries have helped them. Years and years and years ago, I was listening to a radio talk show, and it was a gentleman. He was an architect, and he was talking about he didn't go through the kind of traditional paths, right? He struggled with money for college, and somebody asked him, well, where did you get your degree? And he said, well, I got my degree at my public library. And, those kinds of things that the public library supports so many, again, because we have access to so many resources, right? If the funding is there and we can help build these communities and we can help build our workforces and we can help build so many pieces, but we need access. And the libraries are such a great equalizer to access and to resources. So
Right.
our representatives were again very aware of the impact of libraries, and so we just need to make sure that they back up that love of libraries with their funding.
Gotta keep pushing. Gotta keep
Yes,
pushing.
definitely.
Library folks talk a lot about the importance of representation in books, in libraries, in staffing. Why do you think that is so important?
Yeah. So a couple of things. When I was a little girl, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Pasadena, Texas, right? So a little bitty city right outside of big Houston. And I was a Nancy Drew girl. I was a Sweet Valley High girl. I was reading books about blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls that were surfing on beaches. I'm like, what does that mean? It just didn't make any sense to me. I loved Nancy Drew and her little blue convertible car, and I definitely wanted a blue convertible car. When I was older, I have a blue car, not a convertible. But there were experiences, yes, that I could relate to, right? Being the new person at a school, or having a crush on somebody, or having, arguments with friends, and how do you solve those? Those things are similar, but it was not until I was a second year student at the University of Houston and I took a poetry class, and it was a Hispanic poetry class. And
Mm.
we went to our textbooks were to be purchased from this tiny little bookstore. And they said, it was on campus, and it was a bookstore called Arte Publico, and it's a indie publishing house, really. And that's still in existence today. It's still at the University
Hmm.
of Houston. But I remember winding down this deep, dark basement stairs, and I thought, good Lord, where am I going? What is happening here? But it was this magical room full of books that were authored by people who had names that sounded like my last name, like Ibarra. And I had not seen that before. And when I read one of the books that had it was the author kind of explaining about her tias and her tios and her, the foods that they were eating were very much like the foods that we were eating at my house. They were talking about their rice and their beans and their tortillas and all of the things. And they were mixing in this poem. I remember it was mixing in Spanish and English, which is one of my grandmothers didn't speak English, and I never learned to communicate fully in Spanish, but I understood every word she said. So she would speak to me in Spanish, and I would respond to her in English. And that's how we communicated. And in that poem, it was the same thing. And I thought, gosh, this is me. Like this, it took me until I was 20 years old to find um, a piece of literature that reflected my experience during 2023 when the book bans were really um, I don't want to say were, they still are, but when that issue was just coming to light and it was so front and center, we had a display of books that had been removed from other campuses, other districts near us. And one of my student journalists was asking me, Ms. Podmore, what does this mean? Like, what happens when these books are pulled. And I said, well, I remember looking at that display of books and I said, okay, this book is about an LGBTQ person. We know LGBTQ people on this campus, right? So if that book is removed, and I just turned the book cover over, I said, their voice is no longer there. So this book is about a girl who has survived a sexual assault. And I turned that book over and I said, that voice is no longer there. That person who survived
Mm.
that sexual assault can no longer have access to somebody else's experience that might have mirrored hers or his. And, we had pictures of our book covers with Black characters on the front. And I said, how many of our Black students won't hear this voice if these books are removed from campuses? And so I think it's so important, not just for the kids that are represented in the books, but for the kids who don't have anybody. They don't know what the experience is of somebody who is from a different culture or different race who is being discriminated against. They don't have that experience. And so for them to gain empathy or understanding or look at a different point of view, so important for our students to recognize that their world is so much bigger than high school or their neighborhood or their community, right? Like there's so many different things for them to learn and explore. And, exploring those through a book is the best way.
What are you working on now?
Well, now, so I am planning for next year
Mm.
doing our Freedom Walk is what I'm calling it now, our Freedom to Read Week, but also kind of tying that in with digital literacy. And there's a really great book by Tiffany Jackson called The Scammer. And it talks about young girls in college who were influenced by a young man who convinced a lot of them to turn away from their friends and turn away from their family and start, believing his way was the only way, that sort of thing. And I was so intrigued by that book. And I found another book about how to identify scams and how to identify online scams and how to be alert for information. When people are, what are the red flags to look for when people are trying to isolate you? And I think that's really important. So I'm kind of building up those programs for that. I'll go back to our Freedom Walk. The Freedom Walk started with that one day station or kind of journey through some of the issues that come with book banning, but it has really grown since then. Last year, we had a panel. We have one of our school board members, one of our public library directors, and one of our newspaper editors, or the city San Antonio newspaper columnists. And the kids, these were questions developed by the students. What what role did each of them play in protecting access to information for the larger communities, right? So the school board member for the schools, the public library director for the larger San Antonio community, and then the newspaper columnist, what role did he play in maybe alerting people to what is happening in libraries? And so I feel like this discussion it's grown beyond the traditional banned books week into just a really nice look at how, again, libraries really are essential in protecting so many of our rights, right? So acts again, how do we find information? And if that information is withheld from us, where do we go? Where do we trust the information? How do we know to trust what information? And so this new one that I'm working on, we're kind of looking at those pieces, right? So how do we
Mhm.
trust the information that's put in front of us, and how do we verify those sorts of things? So that's one thing that I'm working on for next year. But today and this weekend, we're starting our Texas Library Association conference. So I'm about to be surrounded by several thousand of my Texas colleagues, and it's always a really great recharge at this time of year.
How nice. I
Yes.
love going to the state conference.
Yeah. It's great. It's really fantastic. And again, I'm hoping all of our authors and presenters are able to, brave those long lines at the airport that we're
Mm.
hearing about. But it's always, again, great to see everybody and to hear about the wonderful things that are happening in our libraries.
So, a question that I ask everybody on the podcast, is there a book or a series of books from your childhood that still resonates with you?
Well, yeah, we were again kind of talking about some of those Nancy Drew books and some of the other. I'm sorry, I lost you. I lost my piece where you are. Some of the Nancy Drew books and those Sweet Valley High books, I really did love those. But it was that one poem. I'm just going to say it was that one poem, and unfortunately, I don't remember. It was a compilation of poems, and it was. And I think it was because the author was talking about Elena. And that is the name, that's my middle name, but it's also the name of an aunt that raised my father when he was a little boy,
Mm.
and having that just deep connection. And again, even something as simple as having a name that is kind of a Hispanic name or a Mexican name that didn't I had never seen that before. And so to see her name and my name, it's like, oh, look, that's me. And I will tell you that I was surrounded by books when I was a little girl. We had this little tiny public library, and in my office at work, I have a newspaper clipping from when the children's section of that public library opened in 1974. And
Mm.
so it's me and my two sisters, and we're all kind of stair stepped together. My oldest sister was holding my middle sister's hand, who was holding my hand. And we all kind of had this it was just the back of us. And, we were going to explore that at the new children's section of that library. And we were there all the time in that library. And just absolutely loved that space. And I have vivid recollections of my dad reading to us at night, and he's tired as an adult coming home from work, and bath time was finished, and he's finally getting his two girls to bed. And I remember like laying on my bed. My sister and I shared a room, and so the three of us were squished on a twin bed, and my dad reading the book, but the book getting closer and closer to our face because he was falling asleep when he was holding the book. We're like, Dad, wake up. I just have always gifts were always books or books on tape, so very old school books on tape. We had one book, I will say this, that I remember very vividly, and it was The Tortoise and the Hare, but it
Mm.
was a Tortoise and the Hare bilingual edition. And I don't know where my dad found that, and I have not been able to find that. But it was the on your marks, get set, go. And my dad he would read the Spanish version of it, and he's on sus marcos, listos, va. And we would all, scream that way. And that was that was another kind of important book, because again, I had never like, oh, look, those are the words. Like, I know this story. I already know this story, but this story is now told in, a language that I hear when I'm with my grandmother or when my parents are talking. So just lots of books, lots of great books surrounded by me, or I was surrounded by books.
Wonderful memories. What are you reading now?
Well, I have this was actually a couple of weeks ago that I just finished this one. And I just finished a book on the drive up today. And it was April Henry's When We Go Missing book. And I love her books. Her books are great mysteries, but they're short chapters. They're quick to read, but I love listening to them on audio. So it was a great mystery book that I'll be book talking for my students for their summer reading. But I am going to be on the San Antonio Book Festival, serving as a moderator for the San Antonio Book Festival that's happening in 2 weeks. And this book, I just finished it. It's probably going to come up backwards, but this book is called How Books Can Save Democracy. Tiny little book, 80 pages, took about 40 minutes to read. And it is a fabulous discussion of how books can bring back civil discourse that we're just missing right now. When people, I feel like there's a lot of people that have not strengthened that ability to just be still and listen to words, to contemplate a thought that might be different from the way you think about things, to process somebody else's point of view without them in front of you and without you maybe having to make an argument for your own case, right? And this book just talks about how much we're missing that as a society, right? When people are discussing two points of view of an issue, it evolves into a horrible fight and a shouting match. And instead of taking step backs, instead of being quiet and listening to somebody else's point of view without the outside noise, without trying to appear to be whatever, more knowledgeable, more on this side, more on the other side. It's a really fascinating. I cannot wait for this discussion. I'm really looking forward to talking to this author about his book. But that panel, it's two authors, and the other author is Shar Adams, and she wrote a book called Black Owned, and it's the history of Black bookstores in the United States. Another very fascinating read. So looking forward to all of that.
Well, and in one of those oddnesses, you mentioned April Henry.
Yes.
She was on the podcast this week
Oh,
talking about her forthcoming In the Blood, which
yes.
just sounds very
Yes.
cool.
Very
Coming
April.
out in May.
Yes, I know. I'm looking forward to it. Well, I will say that I did talk to her publisher, who will be here at TLA. It's like, would you happen to have a copy of that book before it comes out so I can get my hands on one so I can talk about it with my kids for their summer reading? So I love April. She is just a powerhouse when it comes to reading. I feel like she's one of those quiet authors who she's one who definitely, the kids always tell me, I haven't finished a book. And then I hand them an April Henry book and they're like, where are the other ones? And I take them to my April Henry section. Like, here's your spot. So she's great. She's a fantastic author.
Oh, I'll have to reach out to her and let her know that you name checked her.
Definitely.
I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. For our listeners and watchers, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And again, Lucy, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I did as well. Take care.
Thank you.